Welcome to the Life of Hair. My name is James Atkinson. Thank you for choosing to join in to this episode. Now, this episode is something that I've covered a little while ago, but not necessarily actually on a human, on a real paying client. I covered this on a mannequin head in lockdown 2.0 here in the UK, and I really looked at the sort of technicalities of using this technique. Now, today in this particular instance, we're going to use this technique to make our client mega light, really, really light. It's been a long time since she's had her hair coloured, and she likes to be extra blonde. So I hope you like the end result, and if you do, then let me know down in the comment section. If you've used this technique, if you like this technique, you will have seen from the description what technique we're going to use today. But I know that when I did it previously, I had some mixed responses of whether people disliked or liked this particular technique, and actually probably one of the most controversial, if you will, of all the balayage-esque techniques that I have demonstrated here on the Life of Hair. So I would love to hear some other opinions on whether you like the look of these particular outcomes and finishes from the airtouch balayage technique. And if you do, then wonderful. And if you don't, I'd love to know a little bit more about why. Because I quite like it. It's very long-winded, that is a fact, but the results are excellent. So until next time, look after yourselves, and don't forget to join me and Paul for our Wednesday night live, 9 p.m. Wednesday nights, every single week, where we do all manner of hair cutting, colouring and Q&A tutorials. So do check that out. It's all scheduled over on both of our channels each and every week. This coming week will be over on Paul's channel, and I will be doing some hair colouring. So please come along and check that out. And if you would like to support the Life of Hair further, then you can become a Patreon, linked in the description down below. Until next time, see you soon. Okay, this is what we are dealing with today, a natural level 7 base with some pre-existing airtouch balayage actually on this particular client, and very light through the ends already, but wants to be lighter, cleaner and more platinum. So we are going to refresh the ends also during this technique. But for any of you that aren't aware of this technique or have never used it, we're going to have a good look at the technique in its own right and really kind of help you to understand and kind of get a deeper insight into exactly how you can use this technique and where it's best used. Now, in this particular instance, I've just taken a horizontal section straight across the baseline, and I have blown my hairdryer in at the root area to push through those finer hairs that naturally live amongst the longer hairs of your head. Now, by pushing those hairs through, we'll create separation and diffusion in at the root area, something that we would usually probably emulate with techniques such as a backcombing balayage technique. Now, I know lots of people jump in the comments and say a balayage technique is something that where we sweep hair with a brush to apply colour. But obviously, over time, as these techniques evolve, they get different names. So it's going to be called an airtouch balayage in this video. And obviously, if you don't necessarily agree with the ideology of this being a balayage, then I totally understand where you're coming from. And I do plan to make a video sometime in the future talking about the differences between all balayage techniques. But for now, as this is called an airtouch balayage, we're going to continue to call it an airtouch balayage. Now, by blowing through those finer hairs, some of the bigger benefits of this technique are that the fine hairs go through, and then once the hair has been washed off and dried, all those fine hairs sink back into the hair and create that beautiful diffusion. This means that we do not have to spend a lot of time removing backcombing from our colours, which can be very painful to the client and very long-winded. The other massive benefit of this particular technique is the amount of lift that you can achieve through this technique. It is highly effective at getting very dark clients very light indeed. I would go as far as to say that using a foiling style balayage technique, or a balayage effect, or a lived-in blonde effect, which is my personal favourite to name these techniques, is that when we need foil, we need the maximum amount of lift. We are looking to create loads and loads of lift. Now, when I'm using a freehand balayage technique, I am really only ever looking for 3 to 4 levels of lift lighter than the natural base. This is totally reasonable to air process and get these kind of results. But if we're wanting more than 3 or 4 levels lighter than the natural base, then foil becomes incredibly important. You will have seen many YouTube and Instagram photos and videos of which the client's hair went from black to platinum blonde in one foul swoop. And I will guarantee that those techniques will have been completed using foil. So this is really the true benefit of having a technique like this. Love it or hate it, it does have a fantastic use case. Now, in the particular instance of my client's hair that you're seeing now, I have done every single section on her head. And this is to kind of create or emulate like a baby light effect, but equally wanting to get maximum coverage. So in terms of the lightener I'm using, on the root area, I am using Redken Flash Lift and 20 volume in the back sections, and then when I'm refreshing the ends, I'm actually just using a 10 volume with exactly the same product, just to make sure that I'm getting the optimum lift with the least amount of damage. Now, I am using a bonder in this particular service just to ensure the client's hair remains in the best possible condition whilst taking the hair to as light as humanly possible. But this is a section on the head where I think it's quite important, and a place where a lot of people get confused about where to go. And it's as you approach the apex of the head, the highest point, and you end up with a little triangle. In this particular technique, I just work all the way through to that top triangle. Of course, your section will narrow smaller and smaller as you get to that very top triangle section, but that is okay. You can just work with very small, tiny triangle of hair right at the apex of the head, and it's absolutely fine. Now, you will see sometimes just there on the screen where you blow through your section and the airflow is so powerful that it pushes open the foil below, and you saw I just simply folded the corner. It's no big deal, but it's something to be mindful of, being careful as to which you point that jet of air so that you don't blow open that foil below. But as I say, it's no big drama if you do. Just fold it up and carry on. So as we work through this technique, you know, building up the layers and layers of colour, remember I've left very little gaps in between any of my sections. I'm really working kind of back to back almost on each of these sections just to create the maximum amount of lightness. The picture that I was shown was near on platinum blonde with a very diffused root area. And actually, and I love pushing the boundaries with these kind of techniques, especially as it's a technique that I don't use all that often, and I'm really still discovering the benefits of this technique. I have done quite a few airtouch balayages, but I don't truly feel I understand the technique till I've done it 10 or 15 times, and I definitely am coming up to that point, but it's not a technique that I use very often as it is very time consuming. This particular application took the best part of 2 hours because there is no gaps in between any of these sections. So this is a very long technique indeed. But that's not a problem because I charged accordingly for my time, and I recommend that you do exactly the same. If a technique is going to take you 2 hours, then you should already have a 1 hour colouring service price point, and you simply just double it and charge accordingly. These techniques cannot be done any faster, and if you think they can, then that is obviously you working at a higher rate of speed than me. But truthfully, I highly recommend that you make sure that you've given yourself a sufficient amount of time as to avoid the stress and strain of running behind because you didn't give yourself enough time for a technique. The other big benefit of a technique like this is that when you are colouring the hair and giving yourself plenty of time, you can really relax into it and enjoy the technique rather than feel like it's one of those techniques that just takes forever and it's very long-winded and you don't want to do it again. Quite often stress and strain in the salon comes from not allowing enough time and undercharging our clients. So if the client didn't want to pay for this particular technique, therefore I probably wouldn't be doing their hair at all, because it would be the only way realistically to get the result done, in my opinion. Yes, I could have backcombed every single section of her hair, but imagine the state her roots would have been in after me trying to remove all of that backcombing. It would have been a complete disaster. I could have done a full head of highlights, but it wouldn't have created that diffusion and separation at the roots that a airtouch balayage creates. It is quite a unique look in my personal opinion. And when we look at the diffusion in the final pictures that I'll show you at the end of this video, I don't think you can recreate that specifically with that amount of random diffusion with a set of highlights, even if you did hundreds of baby lights. Now, it would be close, but there are some niche differences, and I think it's something that you really need to try for yourself to fully understand exactly what I mean. But this technique for me holds its own, and it's one that I feel like a lot of hairstylists should try. As we work through this technique, we will get to the center parting at the top of the head and then switch over to the other side. I don't feel like with this particular technique, especially when you're doing the foils back to back as I am here, that you specifically need to work to the parting as I recommend in lots of other freehand balayage techniques. In this particular instance, it makes little to no odds because we're not leaving any gaps in between any of the foils, and there is no separation and contrast being created by this particular technique. So don't be too concerned about where you start or stop at the top of the head. If you want to work in the parting, then amen, be my guest. Now, what I've decided to do is remove the back quadrant before I move on to the front right quadrant. And the main reason for that was that it was fully processed. So I'm going to allow it to sit for a minute before I then rinse it off the minute I've finished this entire technique. Now I'm going to show you this right hand side from the parietal ridge up. This client wears their hair in a right hand side parting. So as I was mentioning earlier, you can just work up to the parting. But what I decided to do was, as I came up to the parietal ridge, I started to pivot my sections to create a slight diagonal as I worked through the client's natural parting. This was an on the hoof decision, one that I made as I was working through, just wondering how it would look. For anyone that's not aware, diagonals help create softness and blending within any hair colouring technique. So I decided to come away from a pure horizontal section and move into a slight diagonal. It's very easy to pivot your sections. Just start very slowly by taking a slightly diagonal section. Because if you take a section that is too diagonal, ultimately what you'll end up doing is then obviously leaving a large dark area within the hair. So I started to just gently pivot my sections as I moved round towards the top of the head. And this helped quite a lot actually, and I was very pleased with the outcome of this particular style of going through the parting, working horizontally, coming up to the parietal ridge, and then starting to pivot round as I work towards the top of the head. I recommend you give it a go if you were looking to create extra softness with an already very soft technique. But every little helps sometimes, especially if the client's got a lot of hair, as this one has here. The more hair we are colouring, the more blocky and unsightly sometimes like highly diffused techniques can become. I also recommend you don't use sections more than 5mm in depth as you're using this technique. The thicker the sections, the harder it is to blow the hair through the section, and the harder it is to get your foil anywhere near the root area. So please do bear in mind that you do not want to start using very, very big sections. And in fact, 5mm is the absolute maximum. I would recommend for maximum blending sections of around 3mm. But you can practice and try different size sections and see what works for you. But if they're bigger than 5mm, you will really struggle to get hair to blend. Not enough of those fine hairs will get blown through the section, and actually what can happen is it looks like you've just laid on bleach onto the hair, and even if you blend back up towards the root area, you can be left with quite a hard demarcation. I have learnt this the hard way when I very first tried this particular technique, and everything that I share with you is from me learning from mistakes. I make mistakes. I am only human, but I make sure that I learn from those mistakes. and help you guys with the foresight of not making those mistakes, hopefully. Anyway, as I talk, you are getting to see the final result of what we did here. We've toned it with Redkin. We've toned it with Redkin Shades EQ 9V, 10N, and Crystal Clear, and a couple of drops of 9T just to finish the job off. And I'm sure you'll agree, it is really, really white and light. I hope you've enjoyed this episode, and I hope you get to use this technique very soon. And when you do get to use it, I hope you really, really enjoy it. Until next time, see you soon.